Before slavery stole his name, his language, and his home, Onesimus belonged to a proud West African community. There, healing wasn't superstition, but science passed through generations. And in his homeland, smallpox was not a death sentence. African healers used a method called inoculation, a procedure that exposed a person to a weakened form of the virus so the body could learn to fight it. It was brilliant, effective, and centuries ahead of the Western world. But the day the slave traders arrived, none of that knowledge protected him. Shackled, dehumanized, and thrown into the belly of a ship, he was eventually sold on the docks of Boston to a preacher named Cotton Mather, a man who saw himself as educated, yet owned a man more knowledgeable than he would ever realize. Boston, 1721. The city felt like it was holding its breath. Smallpox had returned. In the early 1700s, those two words were enough to make anyone tremble. There were no vaccines, no antibiotics, no understanding of viruses or immunity. Just fear and waiting. Smallpox was a cruel visitor. It kicked in the door of your life, and once inside, it disfigured, blinded, and killed with merciless efficiency. Within days came the fever, the vomiting, the hallucinations, and the dreaded rash that spread like fire across the skin. Homes became silent prisons, families nailed their doors shut. Neighbors refused to help neighbors. Boston's population was barely 11,000, but ships sailing in from Barbados carried infected passengers, and one single case was enough to ignite the spark. Rumors spread faster than the disease. It's on Fish Street. A child died on Milk Lane. Fear is contagious, and in 1721 Boston, fear was everywhere. By early summer, smallpox had become an invisible fog wrapped around the city. Nothing felt safe. The church bells rang so often with news of death, they became part of the city's background noise. The worst part, people didn't just fear smallpox, they feared each other. The wealthy fled to the countryside, leaving the poor to suffer. In the middle of this rising panic was Cotton Mather, running from home to home, checking on the sick, constantly praying for answers. Doctors were bleeding patients, believing draining blood would cure infection. Others used mercury, which poisoned more people than it healed. Smallpox did not discriminate. But one group suffered the worst, the enslaved, who were often forced to work until they collapsed. Boston was becoming a battlefield without soldiers, and the city's leaders had no defense. Until one man, whose voice had never been valued, stepped forward with something the entire city desperately needed. Not a potion, not a prayer, but an idea, a memory from another world. This was the moment Onesimus would change the course of American history. One day, amid the chaos, Onesimus told Mather something unbelievable. "Master," he said, "in my country, smallpox does not kill like this. We know how to protect ourselves." He then showed Mather a small, distinct scar on his arm. It wasn't a brand from a master or a wound from a fight. It was proof that he had been inoculated in Africa as a child, long before he was ever brought to America. Mather, desperate for a solution, was stunned but intrigued. He didn't just take Onesimus's word for it. He went out and questioned other enslaved Africans across Boston, asking them if they knew of this practice. One by one, they confirmed the same thing. They described the process, they showed their own scars. The message was clear. Africa had mastered smallpox prevention long before Europe or America ever understood it. For Mather, this was a revelation from an impossible source. For Boston, it could be salvation. When Mather shared Onesimus's cure with the city's leaders, Boston lost its mind. Doctors mocked him, calling the idea barbaric. Politicians dismissed it as madness. Newspapers ran articles claiming that African medicine was devilish and that using it was an offense against God. Some people even declared they would rather die from the disease than accept knowledge from an enslaved African. The city's medical establishment, a fraternity of white, European-trained men, could not accept that the answer to their biggest crisis came not from their libraries, but from the memory of a man they considered property. The resistance was fierce, fueled by a toxic mix of arrogance and racism. But in the midst of this furious debate, one man decided to listen to the science, not the prejudice. His name was Zabdiel Boylston, a young and respected doctor who saw the logic in what Onesimus had described. Risking his career, his reputation, and his life, Boylston made a brave choice. He inoculated his own 6-year-old son and 2 of his enslaved servants. Then, he waited. The entire city held its breath. They all lived. Soon, thousands of others, desperate and out of options, lined up to follow their lead. The results were undeniable. When the smoke finally cleared and the epidemic ended, the numbers told a story that could not be ignored. Of the thousands who had bravely chosen inoculation, only about 1 in 9 died. But among those who refused the treatment and contracted smallpox naturally, a staggering 1 in 3 died. The evidence was clear, stark, and irrefutable. The knowledge Onesimus carried from Africa had saved the city of Boston. But when the medical journals were written and the histories were recorded, his name was nowhere to be found. The records praised Cotton Mather for his advocacy and celebrated Dr. Boylston as a medical pioneer. But the man whose knowledge started it all, his contribution was uncredited, his legacy was ignored. History was already beginning to erase him. Onesimus eventually bought his freedom, but not because he was rewarded for saving Boston. There was no parade, no medal, no public acknowledgement of his life-saving contribution. He had to pay for his own liberty himself, using the small amounts of money he managed to earn from doing side labor after his daily work was done, after years spent in bondage. He purchased his freedom, and then he vanishes from the historical record. He fades into the background, while Mather and Boylston became celebrated figures. But his knowledge, the ancient wisdom he carried across the ocean, lived on. It inspired the very practices that would eventually lead to Edward Jenner's modern vaccine, the vaccine that would go on to eradicate smallpox from the entire world. A global victory that began with one man's memory. This is why the hidden chapters exist, to bring light to the names left out of the textbooks. Onesimus was more than an enslaved man. He was a scientist, a healer, and a guardian of ancient knowledge that saved countless lives. His story is a powerful reminder that history is not just written by the powerful. It is also shaped by the brave, the forgotten, and the silenced. If you believe stories like this deserve a voice, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another forgotten chapter. And before you go, we want to ask you, do you think schools should teach stories like Onesimus' as part of American medical history? Yes or no, and why? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters in rewriting the narrative. Thanks for watching.